People let their perceptions of others control them. And the key word is perception. Because the truth is, you have no idea what they're actually thinking.
I ultimately tricked myself into saying, look, it wasn't about the result, it's about the process. Just have fun with it, figure it out, go through the thing. And I use that all the time.
The process is more important than the theory behind it.
Let's look at your situation. Let's come up with a solution. If you want my solution, great. I'll help you with it. If you don't want my solution, great. Go off and do something else.
Welcome to Marketing from the Edge podcast. I'm Cody Alexander. I've directly generated over $200 million in net revenue over the last 5 years through innovative marketing and a numbers-first strategy. Joined with me is my dad. John Alexander has become the go-to expert in the direct marketing field, generating over $1.5 billion in revenue over the last 5 years. Sought by both board of directors and nine-figure businesses, he is an owner/founder of Centurion Publishing and is on the journey of growing this brand new business from 0 to 100 million in annual revenue. Today, we're going to dive into how to drown out the noise, when to know when you're getting good advice versus uninformed opinions, knowing there's a time to actually stop and listen, and there's a time to ignore the crowd and just build. This is about understanding the signal from the noise. Here's how we build our business. We just got done with the sheep, wrestling them, getting them taken care of. And you talked about feedback and that being the next thing you wanted to talk about. So why are we talking about feedback?
Yeah, so this came up recently. Sometimes in order to make a point, sometimes you swing the pendulums way far. And so it was somebody who was constantly looking for other people's opinions. And I'm like, hey, feedback doesn't matter, which is not actually true because it does matter. But they're so swung one direction that I swung the other. And it's one of those people that they're looking for two things constantly, right? They're looking for validation about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or they're just uncertain. And in this case, like it would be stuff like literally every single person that walked in the room asked their opinion about a setup, whether they're qualified for it or not. And so that's the challenge. When you're looking for feedback, and I say this all the time, when it comes to marketing, my opinion, your opinion, they're opinions, right? They're based on experience, but again, they're just opinions. The only one that really matters is the one handing over the credit card, buying whatever you're buying. That's the feedback you should listen to, right? Not a focus group. Don't listen to the people that write in that don't own any products and complaining about something, right? So there's a way to evaluate the feedback coming through and get it to where it actually benefits what you're doing, as opposed to impacting what you're doing, but leading you astray. So I always try to be really careful about, number one, the amplitude of the feedback, right? When you talk to customer service agents, they get off a phone after talking to somebody, right? They're highly emotional, highly charged conversation. They're like, everybody feels this way.
Yeah.
Well, everybody doesn't feel that way, right?
I've had that conversation more than once.
And typically by nature, I understand most people aren't calibration people, right? They're not numbers people. So they don't look at it and say, I got 10 phone calls today, 3 were angry.
Well, and they also go back to when something like that happens, they think of every other time it's happened. And so it's like a confirmation bias, right? They're like, oh, I've had this conversation a bunch of times. It's like, you may have had this conversation 10 times over 6 months.
6 months, exactly.
Right? And so that is a really interesting point because so often, I think personally, professionally, so many people worry about what other people think instead of looking at it and stress testing how they actually feel or what they believe about it and ask themselves the question, why?
Exactly.
And they figure out if you decide how you feel about it first, you're far less likely to go get external confirmation unless you don't have enough information.
Yeah. And then you can go to the extreme. And I saw this recently. So, I belong to a bunch of e-letters and a bunch of marketers lists and stuff like this. And a marketer had written in where 2 people wrote in, read his story, 2 people wrote in, and both had 2 entirely different opinions. And he's like, really what it comes down to is whatever they're saying is about them and not about me. And I'm like, that's such bullshit too, right?
Yeah.
Like the reality is that that's a great way to take no personal responsibility for anything you're doing. If you come up and you're like, hey, how's the morning? Or screw off and the guy's like, all angry. You're like, oh, that's about you, not about me, right? Like that's such bullshit. But again, calibrate it out. If you write an article and you get 20 pieces of white mail back, which is what you want, right?
Yeah.
You either want angry responses or happy responses, but you want a response.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the middle.
The whole point
right?
you're there.
when you calibrate that out, look at it and say, okay, I got 20 pieces. I have 1,000 people on my list. A few people feel like this. A few people feel like that. And what people do is they're like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want because I'm a small business. Like, that's a great way to go broke.
Yeah, like you said, you could go too far one way, you can go too far the other. One thing I've talked about, I always drive home this point of like real world results, right? You can have all the book smarts in the world.
Exactly.
You can have all the opinions and theories and whatever, right? But unless you've tested it in the real world and gotten results and measured those results, right? Then all you have is an opinion, and that doesn't mean much.
One of the other things that comes up is people allow input and ideas into their head from somebody with no real experience to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just bought a book on Leaps. We have a Leaps product, which is basically a long-term options product, 12-month options product. Somebody recommended the book. I'm like, great. So I'm reading through the book, and it's got some good stuff in it. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's got some great, valuable things. And it's 280 pages that could get condensed into 65 probably, right? But when I got right down to it, as I start, the guys were like, I've been doing this since 2017. The book's written 2017 to 2020. Well, shit. Right?
Geez.
In the financial market, right?
Yeah, as if it's not different.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second thing is the guy goes, and I did 91 leaps. I'm like, you've barely done enough to understand what the hell you're doing.
Yeah.
Let alone enough to be an expert and tell everybody else how long-term options are going to save their world, right? Like 91 options is next to nothing from an instructor standpoint, right?
Well,
look at a guy like Tim Sykes. Shit, he does 90 in a week.
Yeah.
When he's been doing it for 10 years. Like, this guy did 91 options over the course of 3.5 years. Like, that's just not enough to have an experience to really be able to understand and tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly and what you're about to run into.
And the fact is that 3.5 years in the market is a blip. You don't have any reference point. You're in a sweet spot. I want to bring up an analogy that I use with my team when it comes up to this real world results, right? And it's really interesting because I feel like it cuts to the heart of any time someone's like, you ask the question, why are we doing this? And they're like, well, I think, or I feel, or you have a statement that starts with that. That should scare you.
Exactly. It's like never and always. Like,
And so when I feel is always like someone telling you, hey, chop down the tree with the sharpest tool you have. Great advice.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but it doesn't mean anything. And the fact is, if you've ever actually chopped a tree down, you realize once you've chopped the tree down, that's actually the easy part, right? Next, you take off the limbs, you cut it up into pieces that you can actually manage, and then you have to move it. Using the tool is the easy part, right? Learning what actions to take when things go wrong, and whatever YouTube video you got the idea from doesn't cover it. That's where you actually get real world results, and that's where you accelerate your growth. And that's why all the time I talk about the concept of I think I feel is the same as chop a tree down with the sharpest tool you have. It sounds good and means nothing because it doesn't address the actual work that has to be done in any circumstance.
Yeah, and there's so much in all those things, like email deliverability. Like, we need inbox placement. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But there's a shitload of work that takes in order to have that statement. The other day, I'm like, hey, we should do a live event, right? That was my statement. We should do a live event, right? That was the extent of my input into the damn thing, by the way, right? It took hours and hours of the team putting it all together, all the other pieces, all the other things to accomplish the ultimate goal, which is, hey, let's do a live event. Yeah. So, you realize that there's all these other things behind it. And people all the time are like, oh, I had that idea before anybody else. Ideas are a dime a dozen.
Oh, yeah.
Ideas and opinions like, hey, we should chop down the tree. Like, that's a dime a dozen. I knew a guy once, he's like, man, I'm really good at coming with ideas. I can come up with an idea a week. I'm like, shit, I can come up with an idea a week.
Yeah.
But you can't execute on the idea. So what's the point?
Yep.
You actually think the hard part is coming up with the idea. And so you're not surrounding yourself with anybody that knows how to execute, right?
What's the difference between the guy who says, hey, we should try to get to Mars and the guy who has to figure out how to get to Mars?
Exactly, right? The visionary and the integrator, right?
Exactly.
So I do think that you got to be careful when you do get feedback, right? When you do ask somebody's opinion, it's from somebody that's doing it at a greater scale or deeper or longer, or that you trust what they're saying, right? And then you still have to calibrate it, right? One of the challenges with get-rich books, right? Books in general, like How to Invest in Real Estate, is that worked for that guy the way he did it, in the area he did it, at the time he did it. The problem is, like, that's fine, but it's not going to work twice the same exact way. What I'm building here at Centurion is entirely different than what I did at Agora.
Yeah.
Is it based on the same framework? Sure. front-end acquisition, CPAs,
and all your skill
LTV.
sets still apply, right? Everything you're bringing to the table, right? But it doesn't mean you can go up and go, here's A, B, C, D. The phrase of like, oh, if any coach is like, I'm bringing my playbook, run for the hills.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're like,
exactly. Well, it reminds me of the internet marketing world, right? In the 06 to kind of 2010 world, where most internet marketers never actually marketed anything but how to make money on the internet.
Yeah.
So the ones that were really good are the ones that actually had a business and they learned how to market their business, like a Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He had a wine company, actually figured out how to market his wine company, and then shared those secrets of what he did with others, right? What most internet marketers did was like, here's how you make money on the internet. Well, they're teaching how to make money on the internet. They're using the internet to make money off of students trying to teach them how to make money on the internet.
Yeah.
But how are those guys going to go out and make money on the internet?
Yeah, it's a loop of here's everything I've read. I'm going to give you the shortcut. But in the truth, there is no shortcut.
And the thing is, they, in general, now this is kind of slamming the internet marketers a little bit. I was neck deep in that entire world, is that they always held back the 10% that they didn't actually want to tell you.
Yeah.
That made the difference. And they shared what used to work last year with you, right? Split tests, and you use blue buttons and all that crap, right? The stuff that doesn't really matter. They shared that with you because it sounded great and sexy, and then they saved the 10%. And the next year they saved that 10% because the market had moved on.
Yeah, it will. Like, there couldn't be competition.
Exactly, because they really were. Like, if you think about it, just in general, you're like, okay, you're creating a system that all these people are going to do the exact same thing you did.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
So you're naturally not going to share all the stuff.
And the thing is, the space was too small. If you have a big niche, you can share everything you're doing because there's only so much you're going to do. I want to go way, way, way back, though. And you talked about the person who wanted everyone and their brother's opinion. And I think I've ran into so many people like that. And I think a lot of people have this. It's natural in my eyes, but so many people worry about what other people think.
They do. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is. Like, it's not built in me. In fact, I go the other direction too far.
I have an opinion, though, on this. I think one quick thing is, before I tee up why, is people let their perceptions of others control them. And the key word is perception. Because the truth is, you have no idea what they're actually thinking. You're giving power to thoughts that aren't real.
So Dan Kennedy used to say, like, what other people think you is none of your damn business. Like, that's his saying. And it's such a great way to put it to who gives a shit, honestly.
Yeah. My version of it is like, it's giving power to thoughts that aren't there and people that don't care. That's what it is 99% of the time.
Exactly.
They're not actually thinking it. And frankly, they don't even care.
Yeah, because most people are worried about themselves. They're not worried about you.
Yeah.
They're thinking about you.
To me, it's like goes back to tribe equals safety concept, right? If you're around people who think the same way you do, you're safe. You don't have to worry about like someone pulling the rug out from underneath you. And the truth is that whole concept of what other people think and trying to predict what they're thinking, it's an invisible monster.
Yep.
You're fighting something that's not real. You can't see it. You can't do anything about it.
Yep, exactly.
Here's a fun little practice. I was on a phone call with a friend the other day, and they were worried about what someone else thought about this journey they had put together. And I was like, if you're so worried about it, call them up and ask them their opinion on it. Frankly, ask them their opinion on if they think it's good or bad.
Yep.
I'm like, chances are they would have to sit there and think about it. You know why? Because it's the first time they're thinking about it. They haven't even looked, like they haven't even noticed.
Nope. It's so true. It's so true. It's so funny because if you really think about it, most people are thinking about themselves. So they're sitting there thinking, like, I wonder what that person is thinking about me.
Yep.
And that other person's going, I wonder what they're thinking about me. Well, neither one are thinking about the other person.
No.
They're thinking about how they're coming across. It's one of the reasons why I used to hate going on video, like on a Zoom call or whatever. I'd start to see myself and then you lose track of your thought because you're looking at yourself, you're like, what's behind me? Like, what's this? What's that? Like,
you get in your own head. And in my opinion, it's a fear.
It is a
fear. You
fear.
are worried, like you're fearful of it, and you have to get control, right? Because the fact is that, like I said, it's an invisible monster. You can't fight it. And the truth is that it's an invisible monster. But the idea is that you can't actually do anything with this fear. So you have to take control back and just be okay moving forward.
when I first really focused on buying a lot of houses in the 90s, I knew enough to be like, hey, where you don't get deals is where everybody else is shopping, right? The MLS. Where you do get deals is by going after people. There's always a chunk of people that don't want their house. Always. In this market right now, 3 to 5% of the people would love to get rid of their house.
Yeah.
It's just the way it works.
You're preaching to the choir a little bit.
You have that balance, right? And so what I did was, because I felt like I could write a pretty good sales message, right? So I wrote a sales message, went down to my local title company. In the West, we use title companies, not attorneys. And I created a letter and I targeted the list, right? I targeted those people that owned a house that didn't live in the local area. And so somebody that owned a house that didn't live in the house.
Yeah.
Right? Because a chunk of those people I know ended up death, divorce, job location, whatever, and ended up renting the house or doing whatever. Yeah. So that I was great at, right? I'm like, I knew how to do that. I could make the phone ring inside out. But I hated getting on the phone and negotiating, right? Like I hated selling.
Yeah.
I just did. So most of the time I'd let the call come in and hit voicemail. They'd leave their message and their address. And then I'd do all the research on it. So at least I was prepared coming into the call. And so what I decided in order to accomplish this, and I've heard other people do very similar things, is that I decided, I'm like, look, the first 10 of these calls I call back, my goal is not to actually buy a house, right? My goal is to have a conversation with them, to learn, right? To figure out how to do this, right? What is it? Because in essence, in order to get somebody to sell you their house in a situation like that, right? You got to build rapport.
Yeah.
You got to have some common ground. You've got to come up with the math. You have to understand that the number and what you can do is likely not what they want.
That's like the last part of the equation.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're buying houses like that, you got to buy wholesale and sell retail. I can't buy retail and sell retail. Yeah. Just like buying toilet paper. I can't go to the grocery store and buy toilet paper and then turn around and sell it on the street.
Yeah.
I can go buy it at Sam's Club at a warehouse and go sell it roll by roll somewhere. So you have to do that. But I ultimately tricked myself into saying, look, it wasn't about the result. It's about the process. Just have fun with it, figure it out, go through the thing. And I use that all the time. When I get into something that I'm not super comfortable with, or I'm trying to learn, or I'm trying to get better, as I stop focusing on the end result, the making money or doing X, and I focus on, okay, well, how do I just learn and get better doing this? So how do I learn and get better and take the feedback in? Not the feedback on did I sell or not, which can be debilitating when you suck, because you really do in the beginning.
Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings is, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first, right?
Yep.
Like that's
I've heard you say it.
We said that on the first episode. And so you take that off and now you're like, okay, now it's just, did I hit the points I needed to hit? Did I allow the conversation to steer away? Was I too fearful to give them a number because I didn't want to get rejected? Mm-hmm. What happened? Like I had a grading sheet. I had like 12 things that I needed to accomplish on that call. And that's what I did. And ultimately by the 6th or 7th call, now I got pretty good at this thing. I'm like, okay. And I built up me a model. And I knew that I wasn't great at sales on the phone at the time. I got better. At the time, I really
You would hope over time.
Yeah, I really thought sales was a 4-letter word. I'm like, oh shit, I don't want to be known as a salesman, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize, shit, everybody's selling. But ultimately, I got to where, okay, I was hitting the points, right? I was hitting the things that I needed to hit. And then it just became a process of, I'm providing these guys a solution. Either they want to take it or they don't. And my thing always was takeaway sales. Like, I'm not a big regret guy, right? Because it doesn't work on me. I'm not a peer pressure guy because it doesn't work on me, right? Yeah. There's a lot of things like that. Lots of levers that I don't pull, right? I'd rather sit instead of face to face to somebody, shoulder to shoulder. Let's look at your situation. Let's come up with a solution. If you want my solution, great. I'll help you with it. If you don't want my solution, great. Go off and do something else. We have a great conversation and off we go. So anyways, that's like that feedback loop on how you can overcome a lot of those things and understand like which piece of the feedback loop you should be paying attention to and who should you really be listening to.
Yeah, like anything else. It's the process is more important than the theory behind it, right? Getting great at the process is more important than the plan that originally you came up with, right? Just like we talked in a previous episode about what you wanted to do when you started and all the things you ended up doing. It's never the same. And I think that's why the fact of the matter is we are the last people to be mindset people. What you need to work on is your mindset and your self-limiting beliefs. Like, no, not for me. I think that, not that I don't think that stuff is real, but I'm just not here to preach on that. What I think the main premise is, though, is really is that you can get stuck in your own head or you can go get shit done. You can worry about the outcome or you can figure out how to get good at the process.
And in getting good at the process, take the feedback in the process. Look at, okay, what am I doing? And self-evaluate. And if you can't, find somebody you totally trust that can self-evaluate you.
Yep.
Right? But if you're a $60 million company, don't go get advice from a $12 million company that's in the same industry.
Yeah, if you're the president, probably the janitor doesn't have all the context.
Exactly. And if you're putting on live events, go and asking the concierge person up front, like, hey, what do you think of my stage? Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, does it? But I've seen it. I've seen all this shit.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's
I've seen
real.
people ask the friggin' janitor their opinion of which suit they should wear. Like, how's that guy qualified? Why would you care about his opinion any more than your own?
And I think that's one of the biggest things. Anytime you're getting feedback is the more you can provide context or the more context they already have, the more qualified the feedback you'll get.
Exactly. All right. I think we pretty much hit all the points I wanted to on this one. Right?
Yeah. I got to go get this sheep poop off of me. So
I just know people allow people into their head that they shouldn't have let in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this feedback is super important to me, because it is important and you do need it. But if you're going to take everybody's opinion, you're better off taking nobody's opinion.
Yep.
So that's why feedback doesn't matter. If you're that type of person that needs validation from everybody, stop. Cut it off from anybody and stick with what you think works for you.
Yep. Results over ideas, process over outcome.
Yep.
Go out there, go make some money.
If you're selling something, worry about the person giving you the credit card.
That's the truth. That's the bottom line.
Awesome. All right. See you next time.
See you.
You've been listening to Marketing from the Edge podcast. If you want to hear more of our thoughts every week, visit marketingedgepod.com. We'll share more of our very best lessons, thoughts, strategies for growing a business, as well as some personal stories here from the edge of the world. Invest a couple minutes of your morning and we'll give you the blueprint to growing your business from where it's at today to where you want it to be. That's marketingedgepod.com. If you want to reach out to us directly, feel free to email Cody at marketingedgepod.com and you might get a surprise bonus.